So first of all, thank you for having me. Thank you, Daniel, for giving me the opportunity to talk in this very respectful forum. I'll just introduce myself and what we're going to talk about today. So I'm Eldad. I'm based here in Tel Aviv. I've been coding for over 20 years now. I started really young at the age of 12. I've been the CTO at Walla News and CareerPage, which is a small startup which I also co-founded. And these days I'm the creator of Upright.io, which is a pretty new open source project. Currently the Upright team is consisted of 5 core maintainers and over 100 contributors from over 30 countries. So it's getting pretty big, and we'll talk about it a bit later. And so what our main topic is going to be about is the path to really building a successful open source project. And in order to really speak about the path to building a successful open source project, we really need to start about what is success. So I think the main and the most important thing about success is it's really relative. It's really relative to your own goals and to your timeline. So in one certain point of time, certain KPIs or goals that you have reached can really be considered a success, but in a later stage, they might not. And for us at Upright, success was really about several KPIs that we really felt that were impressive and really fulfilled our goals and even exceeded some of our goals. So just to give us a small overview about the project and what we are going to talk about. So Upright was first launched about 8 months ago to the open source community. It really became viral overnight. I just published the project on GitHub, and it really started to gain a lot of traction on social media. I also wrote some posts about it, and we're going to talk about the process, why it became relatively successful. The project has reached over 2,500 stars on GitHub, which is really an awesome number. Just comparing it to a huge project like Elasticsearch or Sentry, Upright took 8 months to reach that amazing milestone, while like Elastic, for comparison, took something like 20 months, I think, to reach the same goal. So it's really growing rapidly. It was also ranked as GitHub most trending JavaScript project for over 5 times. It was featured on Hacker News. It was picked as one of the most trending projects by opensource.com. And in this short period of time, we got over 100 code contribution, 300 forks, 250 pull requests. So it's really growing rapidly. And we have a huge community. Our community is currently consisted of about, I guess, almost 300 developers all over the world. And I'm going to talk to you about some of the steps that I really feel that helped us reach such a significant traction and make an open source project that is really helpful for developers. And let's start. So I guess like with every product that we are building, the most important thing is to start with a problem. Like you don't want to just build a product to say that you built something. It's usually a successful product starts with some kind of a real pain that you are trying to solve. And in the best scenario, you are becoming the first customer of your own product. Like it should solve some kind of a problem for you. And for me, it was a really big problem. If I'm trying to like put one single title on the problem that I felt that I had during my career, both as a software developer and also as a tech leader, as a team leader, as an R&D manager. So I really started to feel over time that software development is becoming really, really hard, maybe too hard. I started 20 years ago. Things were pretty simple. It was a lot of HTML, CSS, some backend programming. But we are in a rapidly changing industry, and I like to focus like on 3 main issues that combine to this one title, that software is really, really hard. But I'm sure like if I'll ask, we have like almost 30 developers here in the talk. If I'll ask all of you, what are your problems with software development, I'll probably get something like 1,000 different answers. But for me, it really focused on 3 main issues. And the first issue was that I really felt like software development is kind of have too many skills that you have to master in order to be a good software engineer. And this is just a partial list that that just popped in my head. And it's really hard these days to be a junior developer and really build an end-to-end product which is really good and secure. And we have all these different concepts, and there every day we have new things coming up. And even when you start feeling like you are really mastering your stack, like every 2 years we get a new framework, and we are in an industry that is really prone to adjust new trends, not always justicefully, but it's a big problem. I was finding myself like as a team leader trying to write job description, and I really felt like, am I trying to hire a human being, or is it an entire IT department? Like, who knows so many things? So we try to build like training programs and have sessions like this one to really help developers like enrich their knowledge and stuff. But it was really, really difficult, which leads me to the next problem. And this problem, I really felt that when I started to manage multiple teams, like when I was an R&D manager and I saw the bigger picture of our R&D department, especially when I was working at Walla. And I really felt like most of the work that our different team is doing is really repetitive. And I see it across different teams, but also sometimes I even saw it in the same team, like two different people working on stuff that maybe has different naming convention or stuff, but at the core basic, they're pretty much the same. And when I started my startup, I felt like 70% of what I'm doing is really, really repetitive. I'm solving old problems, I'm solving stuff that I've already tackled before, and I don't really have enough time to really give a unique value to my own product, to my own mission statement and stuff like that. So it was really, really frustrating to like not have enough time to put the focus on where it's really important. Which leads me to the third problem, the one that personally I felt the most pain about, is that software security is super, super hard. And I've been programming for over 20 years. I can't say that I know everything there is to know about software security. And I think especially the software security is like one of those things that you can never stop learning. There are always new attack vectors, new stuff that you have to know about. You always have to stay updated with the latest blogs and news about new concept and new attack vectors, as I said before. And we are in 2020, and we are still living in an age where a single line of code can actually expose like the entire database of personal information. And I've seen it in my eyes. Like it's not something that you should only be scared about. These things actually still happens. So these were my problems, and this leads me to the next step of like building a successful open source project, or any project for that matter, is really finding the solution. And for Upright, if I'm trying to explain what Upright tried to do in the most simplistic, naive maybe way, Upright tried to make software development less painful and allow developers to have more time focused on innovation rather than doing the same things over and over again. And I'll just dive a little bit deeper on what Upright is actually doing. So this is the most accurate definition of Upright. Upright is an open source end-to-end backend service packaged as a set of Docker microservices. Upright abstract the complexity behind cloud backend development to make developers' life easier and give developers a much better starting point for their project. So Upright is basically an HTTP server that gives you all the common tools and APIs that you need to build a modern software. It's basically a backend as a service, which is also self-hosted, which allows you to host it anywhere you want and control your data privacy and security. And basically, it's agnostic to any platform or cloud service that you want to operate from. And it offers some basic services like managing authentication, having the users in your app logged in using different OAuth providers, or by simply logging with an email and a password. It has a database service that you can connect to directly from your client or backend app. It's got a really secure storage service which manage all the file encryption, the file validation. It also has an antivirus that runs in the background and scan all the files before they are uploaded and after they are before they are being downloaded. So Operate is really an end-to-end solution that tries to give you the best starting point to save you time and both focus on your own domain and giving your own value to your product. And I said before that Operate as a microservice architecture, so showing the diagram really helps understand what Operate is all about. And you can see on the left that there are multiple clients like web clients, mobile clients, whether it's iOS, Flutter, Android, or even backend servers, like if you're using Go, Python, Ruby, or PHP, whatever you're using, you can connect Operate, which exposes only a simple REST API. And on the middle, you can see that Operate has this security layer, which handles all the things, all the concerns that you usually had to deal with yourself, like having input validation, having rate limiting, abuse control, or even audit logs, all the different actions on your backend server, like when a user logs in, when a user logs out. If a user logs in from a certain country or from a certain region, you can get notified about it really, really easily. In the center, you can see all the Operate different services, which actually all their goal is to abstract all the complexity that is happening on the right. And this is a classic microservice architecture that you can actually deploy with one single line of code because everything is based on Docker. So it's basically just Docker compose app -d, and you can get all this environment set up wherever you want it to be. And just to like have a little bit better understanding of what Operate is all about, some code examples will probably do the trick. So you can see that like when we talk about file upload, you really think that it's something that should be a really trivial task. But doing the file upload like the best way, which most of the time when we are working on our product, we don't really have that much time to put an effort on it. So in a basic example, you can see on the left like the full list of stuff that I think the perfect upload service would have, like uploading the file, limiting its file size, validating its file size or its type, checking it for virus scans, updating the virus database, which is also very important because if you have a virus database that is like a month old, it doesn't work a lot. Generating thumbnails for your file, compressing the file when you save it to your storage so you can save some space, or even encrypting it, which is something that basically I've never saw an organization that I worked in that really put that much effort on any file upload service. And on the right, you can see like how easy it is to do that thing on Operate, which you don't really have to be aware on all the complexity that is happening on the left. You just have to basically init your SDK with your project ID. You have to get your file input element and just send a request to Operate like create file. And you get the file uploaded and with all these best practices already built in, and you don't have to worry about it. Another good example is user authentication. When I was working at Walla, it took us about 8 months to build a solid user authentication service, which like has a lot of security best practices. And we worked with some of the industry leaders with anything that concerns choosing the best practices for making our service secure. So again, on the left, you can see a list of a lot of features that you have to take care of. And when you're building a smaller app or even a bigger app, you don't have all this knowledge and all this time to make it as perfect as possible. But when using Operate, you really hide all this complexity again. You can see again, just initting the SDK, creating a user account, and you can also create user session the same way. You can log out the user the same way. And everything really is simple. You save a lot of tons of time building all these features from scratch, and you get them for free, basically. All right, so we talked about choosing your solution for the product, but just building a product and putting it on GitHub isn't really going to make it successful or useful for anyone. So the third step, actually, it's a step 2 because we started from step 0, is building a knowledge base around your product, because developers won't be able to use your product if they won't know about it, or there won't be enough resources about how to use it. So when we started Upward, we actually, I launched it when I had enough knowledge base, or enough basic knowledge base, and knowledge base is something that we're constantly working on improving. So for us, it's meant to have a blog, to write tutorials about different and common tasks that you can have in your product or in your project. A lot of how-to, some show use cases of developers that worked with the product. We ask developers that already use Upright to share from their experience and share their apps, and some of their apps have been open sourced actually. So that leads me to having demo apps and projects that are using your tools. And actually at Upright, we created the Upright Awesome List, which basically holds all the resources available online and all the knowledge base, which is a great way for developers trying to use Upright to really have all these resources available in a single point, which is really easy to access. And also about publishing your project is also a lot of marketing jobs. So you really have to leverage different platforms to get your project gain some traction. For us, it was publishing on platforms like Medium or the dev community, on HackerNoon, and of course, social media is a great tool these days. And you can also like republish your articles and tutorials. There is no restriction for you to publish the same content on dev community or on Medium and gain a lot more traction leveraging these different communities to your advantage and to get your project out there and getting noticed. So that's about knowledge base. And unlike knowledge base, documentation is a little bit different. Obviously, it's a different type of content. And for us, it's when you build an open source project, it's not just writing documentation for your user to use, but it's also to write documentation for people to be able to contribute to the project. And in 8 months, we got over 100 different contributors from 30 different countries around the world. And it wouldn't be possible if we weren't directing some of our docs to really explain developers how to use the code base, how the code base is working, what is our architecture, and different tutorials like for really specific tasks, like how do you add a new OAuth provider to Upright. So you basically have a step-by-step tutorial in our repository that helps you do everything by your own. Like if I had to work with each and every developer that was contributing code to Upright, I would never have enough time to do it, and I would never see the project rise to more than 100 contributors all over the world. So it's really important to understand to write both good documentation for your users and make sure your documentation is up to date. And there are a lot of steps that you can take in order to write good documentation. I told Daniel, I just wrote an article about it this week, like the most important 9 tips that we had that we learned in while building Upright, how to write good documentation. And it's a lot about, it starts with the most simple things like having it well designed, having it simple, not having too many assumptions about who is going to read this documentation, having a lot of code example. And I will share the slides later. I'll send Daniel to share the slides with you. And you can click here and really read more about how we write good documentation, or what are principles that we think are great for helping developers having a good experience with our documentation. And the next step, after we talked a little bit about documentation, is it really, your project has to have a face. And for me, it was really difficult because I really like just to sit in the dark and write code. But it's something that I have to overcome, and it really helps that your project has a face and that people know who stands behind your project, even if it's a simpler thing like what is your experience, what is your background, like who can I go when I have a question, especially in the early stage of a project. It has to be a face. And for me, it was also like about talking at meetups, just like this one, connecting with some of the community leaders to help me push the project, to help make it useful for others. and having online webinars in these crazy days where we are all on lockdown. So webinars are really time efficient and help you get really good exposure. So that's really important. It was really important for me, like, to get out of my comfort zone and like put myself in on the front and show the product and what it can do for others. Just a second. So picture speaks louder than words, and we really felt that on social media, that our posts containing images and screenshots really help developers have a better understanding what our product is really all about. And some of the screenshots we shared are for our dashboard, which really help developers understand a lot easier what the product is all about, what it can do. And it's really nice that you have a nice UI. It says a lot of things about your product and how serious you are about it. So we really saw a lot more traction when we share the product or news about the product with a lot of screenshot and visual guidance. And if your product doesn't have screenshot, it can be just a screenshot of some kind of a cool code example that shows how simple your product is for usage and stuff like that. So that's another great tip that I learned during my time working on Opera. You can see some more screenshots, and there are more on the website if you're interested. Community is really important, but a lot of projects are mistakenly seeing it as some kind of a goal. And I think it's really hard to build a community that is first and to look at that as an end goal rather than a mean. And I think there's no better way to grow a community but make it happen organically. And I think the most important things that you have to know when starting an open source project is that you have to set the terms to allow the community to grow rather than trying to build a community. So for us, it was about having a centralized spot where people can really discuss and chat. We started out with Gitter, which is a great tool that integrates really well with both GitHub and GitLab, but we later moved to Discord because we had some better tooling, especially for mobile communication. Having community forums is also a great place to grow a community. It's also really helpful that there's a lot of discussion building up, and when developers are trying to search things about your product, they can end up finding your community forums in the search results. GitHub issue is another great place where we love to share discussions and share about new features, and I will talk a little bit later about our RFC process about new features and making the community a lot more involved in your processes. And another things like Facebook group, newsletter, and social channels are obviously also very, very helpful. But you really just want to make sure that your community has the terms to be able to grow and succeed rather than really trying to force it, especially at such an early stages of your project. Another point which is really, really important when building software or tools for developers is creating transparency. From my experience of building developer tools, one of the most difficult obstacles to overcome is to gain developer trust. Developers are really suspicious about your product when you just launch it, and developers don't like to have black boxes and not understanding how things operate. So I think the first step, we are building an open source project, and building an open source project is one of the best way to build transparency, because people can view your code and they can also see your GitHub stars and how popular is your project. But it's really a little bit more than just having your code out there. Like, it's start with the simple things like having a test and public build so people can know that your project is stable and that you treat testing and stability like very, very seriously. For us, it was sharing our public spec, our architecture is designed, like I showed you in the previous slide. So these resources are all available online, and they are out there for anyone who wants to see and learn what are the internals, how the system works. Is it good for your own needs, for the developer needs? So this is really important when building an open source project or any developer tool, actually, because you have to gain and build trust relationship with developers. And other things that we did, some other things that we did are having a public roadmap, like where is the project going? And people can actually like comment on the public roadmap and say like, I think this feature is not necessary, or I think you're missing a really important feature that will be a good use case for a lot of developers. So if you look at the upright GitHub repository, you can see our project and what is our roadmap for the next 3 versions ahead. And you can actually go and influence and create discussion around it. Also sharing our tool stack, we use Stackshare.io, which is a great website for showing off what tools and technologies you are using. So you can go to Stackshare and see what all the tools that Upright is using, whether it's our organizational tools, like we use G Suite for communication, but we also use like Python, Node.js, Docker, and a lot of other technologies to build our product. And this also helps for potential contributors to see, okay, I like this stack. I already have some knowledge in this stack and I can contribute. So again, transparency, it really helps to build a good, transparent relationship with developers. And another thing that we've just started doing is having an RFC process where we publish a spec about new feature and we request the community to have feedback, to get their input about how they think a certain API should work, what the parameters that the API should get, or what internal tools should we choose, what open source technologies or not open source technologies we should choose to actually build upon. So transparency is like maybe the most important thing to me when you want people to actually use your project, more than just saying it's cool and giving it a star on GitHub. So some final words. It was a pretty short lecture where we gone through the steps of that helped Upright gain significant traction in the open source community. And I think the most important lessons, or one, if you should take one thing out of this talk, is that you can't just build a project and put it on GitHub and expect it to grow like automatically. It really takes building an entire ecosystem around it and giving it all the tools to really be successful. Because success, you shouldn't leave success to luck. You should give it your project or your target at the end, like the best tools and circumstances to be successful. So that's it, basically. I love to share with you the slides. If anyone wants to learn more about Upright, you're more than willing to contact me later, and you can check out the website, the GitHub repository. Give us a GitHub star, will be very nice. And that's it.